I mean, Tracy, do you want to just go ahead and do the Facebook Live thing, and then we can...
Yeah, I'm already into it, actually. I'm about
great.
to hit go live after I take my Ugg boots off because they're a bit hot.
Photo of everyone smiling for social media, please.
Oh, yeah, it's a good idea.
Not yet.
Hey. Oh my God, you guys are giving me life. Thanks, fam.
All right, so if everyone's ready to go, I'll hit go live on Facebook. And then who's going to hit the go live broadcast? Simon, is that you or me?
Yeah, I can do that. So I'll give everyone a bit of a countdown.
Okay. I'm very excited. Thank you so much, everyone, for doing this.
Tracy.
It's awesome.
That'll be great. Well done, Tracy.
Awesome. You're all amazing. Yay! All right, we're going live now.
Okay. Looks like Facebook is up and running. So Tracy, shall we begin the broadcast for the webinar as well? Let's do it.
Sounds good. Let's do it. Hello and welcome to Wednesday Night Book Club. We are so thrilled that you've joined us for our opening show. I hope you've got your pajamas on. Like me, I hope you've got a cup of tea or something stronger. Hubby put a bit of rosé into that, so let's go. We have got a star-studded lineup for you tonight, so let's get right into it. First of all, we'd like to welcome Karen Smith. Now, she's the local education officer for the Aboriginal Heritage Office, and she's going to do our acknowledgement of country. Hi, Karen.
Hi there. Thank you very much. Okay, I was wondering where to start this, but I thought I should start by talking about country here. And this is this area is the country of the Gayamagal people. And the Gayamagal people were well written about by the First Fleet, and their stories are recorded. Also, you know, post-colonisation, the effects that had on the people here. And you'll be able to read about some of that on the Yarnaping Education, which is on our website, the Aboriginal Heritage Office.org. But the Gayamay people were saltwater people. They lived an idyllic life, as the people on the northern beaches still do. And saltwater and freshwater streams, wetlands, the rivers, the creeks were really important to the food sources here. They had a rich cultural, spiritual life. And the engravings that we find around and the sites that we find are testament to this. And also some of the stories of the only ceremonies that were ever recorded in Sydney of the Camaragal people in North Sydney. The Gayamagal people, though, did meet Governor Phillip and all the First Fleet people. Part of learning about history is important in the reconciliation process, and I think we're heading up for Reconciliation Week. And Sorry Day is a time on the 26th of May that we should remember the children that were taken and the generations that were changed because of this. Reconciliation Week is a wonderful week to make initiatives to change things, and it's up to all of Australia to change their relationship with Aboriginal people. And part of that is learning about our story and our history. The Gayamagal people walked proud and strong. Manly was named for the men of the Gayamagal men. And then you go to the women, and they were, the original Manly Cove was called Eve's Cove after the women. But that name unfortunately disappeared from history forever. So I'd like you to think of those ancestors that walked this country, that left their spirits here, that left their story, their ways of caring for country. And if we can continue to learn from all the Aboriginal people out there that are doing so much work to try and improve life for Aboriginal people and for all Australians, and to remember our young people coming forward. So I'd acknowledge the Gayamagal people, and I hope you have a good book club tonight. It sounds really exciting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen, for teaching us more about the history of the area that this book club is being hosted from, which is the Northern Beaches of Sydney. And I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the lands across Australia, where everyone is joining us from, whether they're participants or attendees. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you, Tracy.
It's now my great delight to introduce a wonderful woman. When we thought about getting a theme song for this book club, I thought I'm going to go for this woman who I absolutely adore. I'm a huge fan of her work. You might know her from One the Bear. You might know her from some of her writing, acting, directing. She's now screenwriting between Australia and Hollywood. She's an absolute superstar. Please give it up for Candy Bowers.
Hey, oh yeah, let's do this. Little tiny technical thing. You're going to get pajamas. Are you ready?
Go for it.
Ooh, why is that not starting? I'm having a tiny weeny technical problem with the music that hasn't happened in any of the rehearsals.
Don't worry. Should we go to the quiz and then we'll go to you?
That'd be great. I'm not
Excellent.
sure. Let me check it out.
And I love your PJs, by the way. Very nice. Very sexy. All right. We have decided to run a book quiz as part of Wednesday Night Book Club. And the man running it is also a bit of a multi-hyphenate like Candy Bowers. He's a journalist, producer, presenter, actor, playwright. He ended up as general manager of Her Majesty's Theatre, amongst other theatres across the country. He is a bon vivant. He is a raconteur. And tonight, he is our stellar quizmaster. Please welcome Richard Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you so much. I could wrap the quiz while we're waiting, if you like.
That'd be fabulous.
I think Candy's song is a wonderful wrap. But I'm just going to try and find words that rhyme with Philip K. Dick. Because he's a famous, author. I could whack that in there somewhere. No, maybe not. I could see that you're losing enthusiasm for that idea. I think I'm so excited. Thank you so much for asking me to do the quiz. I think it's important for everyone to remember that there's $50,000 up for grabs on the Chaser tomorrow night. But for us, it's all about the prestige of knowing these bits and pieces about literary types and books and stuff like that. So let's get a start going. Now, I can tell you that we've spent an absolute fortune on the opening credits. So we can start with the multi-million-dollar opening credits cycle. Look at that, graphics. And they move. And there's even sound. Well, there goes the whole budget for the show, really.
Richard, that is very fancy. I'm going to have to contact the copyright agency to get a bit more funding for that now. Now,
Okay.
if you'd like to take part in the quiz and you're on the webinar, pop the answers in the chat box and you'll see that along the bottom of the screen.
So as you do, this is all about accuracy and it's also at time. You'll be given 10 seconds after you'll see they're all multiple choice questions and answers. 10 seconds to put that in, and then as a way of judging, not only is it whoever gets the most answers correct, it's who's the timeliest, who gets in there first. So let's make a start. Now, this is a relatively recent novel. Up until probably fairly recent times, you could have bought it at a fire stage, but things seem to have gone a bit wrong there. What is the title of this bestseller? Is it My Challenge, take on the challenge, challenge accepted, or challenge denied. And your time starts now. All right, so hopefully you've written which response, A, B, C, or D. Now, question 2. Who knew we'd have biting political satire in this quiz? This is a book title that was attributed to Donald Trump, and it actually got into the New York Times bestseller list. Is it A, B, C, or D? Now, you could look at those titles and think, yes, he could have written any of them, but it's only one. Which one is it? Okay, question 3. Now, many of us would be aware of Goodreads. Obviously, it's a major website that you can, after you've read a book, you can review and you can put a rating on it if you like. So another website, Book Riot website, correlated all the ratings and came up with which book actually has the highest ratings on Goodreads. Is it A, B, C, or D? Your time starts now. Okay, almost halfway through. Question 4. So time for a little menage a trois, shall we? So what we're going to do here is list 3 characters, and they all appear in the same novel, and you need to guess which novel it is. The characters are Debbie Vickers, Ferris Hennessy, and Sue Knight. I'll give you a clue. They're all sort of very Aussie-sounding names, so they're from a classic Aussie novel. Which one is it? Alrighty, question 5. Now this is a line from a review that appeared in the New York Times. It's a book review and it's about a particular novel. It says, a painfully beautiful first novel that is at once a murder mystery, a coming-of-age narrative, and a celebration of nature. Now, which novel does this refer to? Now, we have in the list there's 2 classics and 2 contemporary novels, but it is from the review of one of those. Which one do you think best fits it? Okay, the penultimate question. And you can recognise the face of Matthew Riley there. He's had a long career, as you know, but he started very young. He's one of Australia's most successful novelists. He started, in fact, by publishing his first novel himself in 1996. But how old was he when he achieved this feat? Was he 17, 19, 21, or 23? Okay, and the last question for this evening. This is relating to a book just recently released by Samantha Maiden, and the overall headline title of this book was Party Animals. But what was its full title? What was the subtitle after that? Was it A, The Secret History of the Morrison Miracle, The Secret History of Palmer's Party Pact, The Secret History of a Labour Fiasco, or The Secret History of Dutton's Attack on Turnbull? go. So at the end of tonight's discussion, we will have a look at the answers, and we will tabulate all of those answers that you've given us over the evening. And then next week, we will let you know who was actually the winner.
Richard, I love that so much. I only have one question for you. That 10-second countdown, did you get that from the Channel 10 archives?
No, I made it myself.
Very impressive. Thank you so much. We will be announcing the answers at the end of the episode, as Richard said. All right, let's go back to the legendary Candy Bowers. Give it up for Candy.
Woo! Oh yeah, we got it. Here we go, Wednesday night. Everybody got their tea? Good. Woo! It's the middle of the week and I need some verbs. A sentence, a story, a plot twist, a word, something safe. My soul needs a feast. I'll bring my slippers if you bring the heat. Drop me in deep to a place never seen, or a place so familiar my heart beats the theme. Dip me in ink, the marks on my skin. Where do I start? Where do you begin? Wednesday night and I'm feeling fine and I'm warm inside. A Wednesday night book club. Wednesday night and I'm feeling fine and I'm warm inside. Wednesday night book club, ooh, letters to lovers ruined by hate. The payers devoured and left to their fate. Fathers and mothers, secrets and lies. The warmth in her voice, the pain in his eyes, vivid and whole. I rush back to you, the bookmark the ear, now mine you can chew. Shut out the day, the weekend has passed. Get me a good book, it's Wednesday at last. Hey, Wednesday night and I'm feeling fine and I'm warm inside. It's Wednesday night book club. Wednesday night, yeah, I'm feeling fine and I'm warm inside. All right. It's the middle of the week and I need some hubris, morality scandal. Hey, why would she do this? A catastrophe, a small box, a keyhole, a key. Drop me in deep to a place never seen, or a place so familiar my heart beats the beat. Fill my cerebrum, I need to be fed. Just one more chapter before bed. Hey, Wednesday night and I'm feeling fine and I'm warm inside. It's Wednesday night book club. Wednesday night, yeah, I'm feeling fine and I'm warm inside. All right. So sit back, relax, and take a seat. Warm your feet, make a treat. Sit back, relax. With new authors to meet in the comfiest space, in your comfiest seat. Yeah. Sit back, relax, and take a seat. Make a treat. Ooh. There's new books to meet from the comfiest chair in your comfiest seat. Like Wednesday night, yeah, I'm feeling fine and I'm warm inside. Wednesday night book club. Wednesday night, yeah, I'm feeling fine. I'm so warm inside. Wednesday night book club. Oh! See you next Wednesday. See you tonight. Let's do it. Yo.
Candy, that was absolutely phenomenal. Thank you so much. And it looks like miraculously your tea turned into alcohol like mine. Thank you. That was outstanding. Would you mind if we put the lyrics on our Facebook page? That was phenomenal.
Hey, do it. Yeah, for sure.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
No worries. Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers, Candy. It's time now for our In Conversation. And when we were trying to work out who to get for our opening show, these two were at the top of our wish list, and we can't believe they've agreed to do this for us tonight. Benjamin Law is a national living treasure. You'll see behind me on the top bookshelf there where my thumb is, That's his book, The Family Law. And you might have seen one of the 3 series that was on SBS that Benjamin created and wrote as well. He's quite extraordinarily talented. You might have seen the show that was on recently with his mum on the ABC, Waltzing the Dragon, or you might have read his book over here, Shit Asian Mothers Say, that he wrote with his beautiful sister, Michelle. He is a wonderful writer. He writes for any publication worth reading. He's also a brilliant broadcaster on the ABC, and we are so delighted he's with us tonight. He's going to be in conversation with the genius, Miranda Rewo. Now, she's written this book, Stone Sky, Gold Mountain. She's also written The Fish Girl, that's there behind me somewhere, right there. You will fall in love with the main character here, Mei Ying. And it taught me a lot also, being historical fiction, about the history of the Chinese diggers up in far north Queensland. Please welcome Benjamin Law and Miranda Rewo.
Thank you so much, Tracy.
Thank you, Tracy.
That is such a generous introduction. I know I can't speak for Miranda, but I am blushing in places that you cannot currently see on Zoom. I don't know about, what are you wearing at the moment, Miranda? This isn't a very low-cut shirt, everyone. This is actually a
Very
robe.
sexy.
I didn't want to look too much like a sex pest, Miranda, but, you know, we were told to dress up in bed. Yes. I'll take that as a compliment.
Thank you.
Hey, Miranda, I am so pleased that we get to have this conversation together, because I've been a fan of this book for a really long time. And I get to say that because I know that I was one of the very first readers of the ranks. And, you know, as Tracy mentioned before, I was involved in hosting Waltzing the Dragon, which was this 2-part documentary on the ABC about Chinese Australian history. And I don't even think before I made that documentary, I was aware of how rich Chinese Australian history is in this country and how deep it runs. I mean, you know, the trade that they started with the Macassans, you know, the first documented global trade with Australia, that predates white arrival, and that was fueled by the Chinese appetite for sea cucumbers. And then, of course, we know about the gold rush, but we don't often get all of the narrative. So maybe we should point out that this book that you've written really breaks that narrative open. It brings other perspectives into the core, and we land in, what year do we land in? And can you set a scene? Can you paint us a picture? When are we? Where are we? And what's the world looking like?
Okay, so it's set in North Queensland, and so it was at sort of a later part in the gold rush to Australia. So it was, you know, down in Victoria originally, and then they slowly worked their way up the coast. My novel opens in 1877. I know that the Maytown, I think, was established probably around 74, 75, I think. So it's not long, and it wasn't really. It was a flourishing town at the time, but it probably lasted only another 10, 15, 20 years, really. And in that time, I mean, it had a bank and, you know, schooling and post office and everything, which is really quite amazing, because if you go there now, it's just mostly forest again. So it's pretty amazing. The other amazing thing with it is that when you look into it, there and Cooktown, well, in the whole area, they had like up to say 22,000 Chinese, which was 4 or 5 times the number of the European Australians there. And a lot of the, you know, the shops and the butchers and the workers and everyone were Chinese. So, and I don't think that really comes across in fiction, that we read about that part of the gold rush, and probably the same to do with the Victorian gold rush, but especially in that area where actually most of the people were Chinese.
Yeah, we're really then therefore at the core of the narrative. They weren't marginalized in terms of their community at the time. Sounds like Pauline Hanson's worst nightmare in terms of the stats that you've just laid out for us.
I know.
You know, when I read your book, which is written in present tense, you feel what the characters are feeling so viscerally, their sense of thirst and hunger, how they've worked themselves to the bone. I want to dig into those characters soon, but I'm wondering for you, take a step back. Why did you want to explore this side of history why this story and why now?
Okay, so when we look at the gold rush and the Chinese and the gold rush, and even when we look at, what happened at Lambing Flat, what we're thinking of are the Chinese and the gold rush. And even when you look at the Chinese in the Californian gold rush, you're looking at like the Chinese as this horde or this group, not as individuals. So I guess the big thing I wanted to do with this novel was look at, the individual kind of trajectory of a couple of characters or a few characters, from how they got there, why, that sort of thing. Why now? I guess, so I've written a few crime fiction set in Victorian London with Eurasian characters. And so I had to look into the first, earlier Chinese in Victorian London. And I was looking at that depiction in society and culture in fiction of the sinister Oriental. So I wanted to kind of write back against that. And in doing that, then you really have to, make your characters individuals as opposed to, one of the people in that sort of horde, this horde of just seeing the Chinese as this one conglomerate, which we probably still do. We probably still look at them. When I say we, I mean, we still look at them as the Chinese students or, the China, especially at now, like.
Yes, they're coming to take your real estate and your baby milk formula.
Yeah. The them again. We're back to the them, and the other. So, and the other thing was that I like to do with any of the historical fiction is make those ties between then and now. So like you mentioned Pauline Hanson before. What I would have really liked to do was maybe find one of her quotes about, how there are too many Asians here and pair it with one from 1880 or 1860 or 1901, because, it'd be easy to find. There was just that same idea that we still hear now, And I guess for me, when I was looking at Australia, one of the weird thing is the European Australians here had been here such a short period themselves. So, they sort of, they were the rule makers and they closed the gates to who they could or wanted to. And yet they'd only been here, a couple of generations themselves, 2 or 3 generations themselves. So it was just that kind of arrogance too, I guess, writing about that arrogance of who you're trying to keep out when you're pretty new to the country yourself.
Yeah, Stone Sky Gold Mountain really strikes me and probably a lot of other readers as both a timely and a timeless book for those reasons, which is what you want historical fiction to do. Incidentally, Mirandy, Sinister Oriental happens to be my drag queen name. No, I'm just kidding. Or maybe I'm not. I might take it on board.
Well, like I said to my brother when I was writing my crime novel, I wanted one of the characters to seem sinister. And the trap is actually it's quite an attractive kind of theme to go with, because it's, that sinister Orientals, with all the robes and the dragons and the, so it's sort of, it's a hard one to write against because I can see the appeal as well, just aesthetically.
Yeah. Now,
well, even like you asked before, like what I was wearing. I'm wearing my pajama shirt that's a Chinatown one.
Oh, hey, represent.
It's got a dragon on it.
Look, I'm talking to you from the middle of Sydney, and Haymarket is just a stone's throw away from me. So
does it have
represent.
a dragon?
Oh, yes, I'll look over there. I can see it now. Mirandy, the heart of the story that you've written, as much as it's about big themes, big concepts, and big ideas, it really lands on these 3 interconnected characters, and I'd love to hear more about them. We've got 2 siblings, Lai Yu, who's forced to flee his homeland, traveled to Australia during the gold rush to try to make a fortune, fulfill familial obligations. And then we've got Ying, who is an incredibly interesting character because for those of us who know a little bit about the gold rush, there were very few, and in some communities, no documented or recorded Chinese women. But we also know that some were probably there, and in some cases there were one or two. And Ying is one of those rare creatures, but she has to hide it. And I'm really interested in how you landed on her as a character and a driving engine of story in this book.
Originally when I was thinking of this novel, I wanted to write, I guess because, what interests me in some ways is reading about the Eurasian families that have grown from the 1800s, the idea of, say, an Irish woman marrying, a Chinese immigrant here and having, big families and they've got their family line to now. So originally I think I wanted to write about a Chinese man meeting a sort of white Australian woman, but I liked the idea. I wanted to write about a Chinese woman, not just a Chinese man. I wanted to write about a Chinese woman. And like you said, there were women, but like you said, only a couple, one or two.
Very far and few between.
Very few. So, which would be interesting in itself to look into. But I just thought for my story, in the middle of a dig, she could only really be there, apart from maybe, I know especially say in America, apart from say sex workers, she could only really be here disguised. And I think it's kind of reasonable to think that maybe she would have to stay with her brother. Like if it was the only option to stay with her brother, then I thought that was credible. And so then I did all my, research into, and it's amazing when you research women who have lived as men, and even if it's in the army or whatever, that they've, for years. So I went on from there, but I did want her, I guess, as opposed to Laya, I wanted her to be probably a bit more like my own, I guess, family, in that they were more adaptable. The Chinese who did travel and they did set up shops and, like say my ancestors, just adaptable, rational. And a bit like my dad, actually, embracing the new, I really admire that. And I wanted her to be like that.
Tell us a bit about your ancestry, your ancestors, and your dad as well, because I guess there's a personal dimension for you because you do have Chinese heritage by way of Indonesia, I understand. Yeah. Tell us about your family.
So my dad's Chinese from Indonesia. He came over to study pharmacy, actually, and then he moved into medicine at UQ. And that's where he met my mum, who was doing medicine too. She's from an Irish English background, so she's mostly Irish, I guess, that whole Irish Catholic thing. And Papa is, so a lot of his family now live in America. They live in LA. He's got a brother here in Melbourne, and I would say he's very Chinese Indonesian. Like he speaks Indonesian. He has to learn Mandarin. So they've been there a number of generations in Indonesia. And I think it's different from Malaysia in that it wasn't, it wasn't encouraged to keep their language. Like maybe I think in Malaysian Chinese probably have kept their Chinese more than their language, more than the Indonesian ones did, which is hence like he had to change his name to Riwo from Chia, which is his Chinese name, Chia. So he's probably listening here going, she's getting it wrong.
That's a parent's right and responsibility, isn't it?
So he's from, southern China. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think Hakka.
Yeah, right. Okay.
I hope he's not at home shouting, Hokkien!
I'm hugging, damn you. And then you've got these two siblings who find themselves in a very alien and hostile, for obvious reasons, environment. And they're really, digging their way through to survival. And then there's also a third character, Miriam, who's a young white woman with her own tragic past. Where did she come from? Was it through your research? And what story did you want to tell through Miriam?
Miriam, so Sophie, who she works for, I actually thought of through just a little account that is in Eureka, the book by
Claire Wright.
Claire Wright. So that's where I got the idea for Sophie. And Sophie was actually originally going to be the character that I concentrated on, but then it was Miriam. I guess Miriam comes from stories I've heard from my mum's side, that sort of Irish background. You hear the stories of, like one story where, the grandma, she's got 10 kids. She goes away with the eldest daughter for a while and she comes back with a baby because she's had a baby. The eldest daughter, those sort of stories. So I guess Miriam comes from there, from that sort of part of my life. But also I wanted her to show, I guess, that I think that sort of racism then, like we look at it now and go, oh my God, she's so racist. But actually, I think a lot of people just thought like that then, and they did.
It was kind of just like the oxygen that they breathed.
Well, it was just like they are Chinamen, or chinks, or just, and they weren't even thinking they were being rude. They were just like talking, And I did want to show that trajectory of when you actually get to know an individual, how it can change how you see that individual and maybe those like them, I guess.
Yeah.
So I wanted to show, and you want to do it subtly, but I wanted to kind of show how she slowly turned. Yeah.
Yes. And one of the really satisfying things as a reader is seeing the ways in which these characters and their trajectories are braided and those unlikely connections and relationships that form. But Mirandy, I'm really curious to know, when you write a work of historical fiction, there's a lot of work that goes behind it. It's not just a pure act of imagination. There has to be fidelity to some kind of like historical truth that you're unearthing as well. So tell us a little bit about the research project. You went to Shanghai on an Asia Link residency.
I did go to Shanghai, and I would say, there were things that I did get out of Shanghai, which was the writing time, actually, because I was at that stage where I actually, when I was in Shanghai, I wrote a lot of Lai Ye's, the brother's part, because I wanted to keep the momentum going with his story, so the tension, I guess. And that's what I did. They had a special exhibition on cricket fighting when I was there, and that would, then I was like, well, that's perfect. I'm going to write about that,
Because just to clarify, this isn't like cricket the game. These are actual crickets that form a very memorable part of the scene in your book, like cricket insects going at each other. This is a real thing.
Yes. So that was just really good timing, then you're like, well, that's how I can start the next chapter. But also it showed, I guess, that he was far from home, like the cricket. So it gave me some insights like that. I was very careful so I didn't take on a lot about, say, the food and everything, because it was just such a different area from where my characters come from. Because a lot of those, the gold diggers came from the southern part, not like where Shanghai is. I spent a bit of time in Victoria looking, like at Bendigo and Ballarat and the museums. You've got great museums like that Immigration Museum, the Chinatown one. But then I did go up to Maytown, and Cooktown has great museums. The museums are great. Eric Rolls. Actually, have you read Eric Rolls' books?
No, I haven't.
I'll get them to you.
Tell us about Tell us about what you got out of his books.
Well, what I love about Eric Rolls is, so there were two. One's called Sojourners, so that's about the gold diggers and that who came over, and they're like these big books. and the other one is called Citizens. So that's moving into, which is probably what my next book, well, my next book will be about the Chinese who actually settle here. And what he's done is he's really done like a lot of the hard work in that he's done that kind of trove searching, you know, like through the old newspapers and memoirs and journals of Chinese people and finding out. So a lot of the information, like Lai Ye's whole journey, like his whole story came from one sentence I found in Eric Roll's book about a Chinese man that was a shepherd, and it was in Victoria. And it was just one sad little line about this Chinese man who'd been a shepherd. And I can't tell, you know, if you haven't read it, I can't tell you what the line is.
Yeah.
But it just fed the whole, then I was like, oh, that's the brother, you know. So, yeah, and so what I tried to do then was I took a few sort of primary sort of sources or accounts, like from, there was a white digger, say, by a waterhole which he called, I think, Blackfellows Creek or something, and he says what he says the line that I think I get Clem to say in the book. So it's clear that there's been a massacre there, you know. So what I've tried to do is, and then I gave that line that he said, I think word for word, to Clem to say, so that my Chinese characters could see it. So what I've done is I've taken a few, and like at the beginning when the guy comes through to check that they've got they've paid their taxes, you know, their tickets, their licenses. So what I've done is I've taken a few of these primary sources and I've tried to turn them, I've tried to skew them so you're seeing them through the Chinese characters' eyes. So they're still sort of true to the source, but I'm seeing it, I'm portraying it through how the Chinese would have seen it or might have seen it. Yeah, so that's what I've tried to do with the historical stuff.
And it sounds like quite an intensive research process. So there's an overseas residency, you're going to a lot of museums, you're reading primary sources, you're reading historical sources, you visited the Palmer River to experience the area. What were, if any, the big sort of surprises or the jaw-dropping moments, the things that you didn't expect to find in that historical narrative where you're like, wow, that has reframed my expectations of this chapter of history?
I think the biggest would have been finding out just how many Chinese there were in Cooktown, and that actually most of them were Chinese. I think I read somewhere that like all the butchers were Chinese except for one. There was one Australian family up there who sort of ran some butchers, and the rest were just like Chinese. I think that was in Cooktown. And then you go along to Maytown, which like is just this dirt road now. But by the side of where there used to be the curb, are plaques of the shops that were there. Like there's, you know, a pharmacy and the bakery, but most of them are owned by Chinese, you know, have Chinese names on the stores, you know. And like one of my favourite books is that It's Raining in Mango by Thea Astley, and it starts in Maytown as well. But I don't think you get an idea from her portrayal. And it's funny because I don't even know if I'd be interested. I think one reader has read both, and I don't know if they read the same or differently, but she mentions the Chinese, but I don't think it's clear that actually there would have been so many Chinese there. So I think for me, that's what was, even though I'd done all the research, by the time I got up there, it was just really eye-opening to realise that there were a lot of Chinese.
Yeah. One of the things that I really was taken by in the book is how you dramatise the ways in which these people never expected to stay here. You know, it's just a historical fact that we take for granted that this was such a major and significant wave of Chinese migration, but they all expected to go back home, and very few got that opportunity.
Yeah, that was a sad
chance.
thing too up in near Maytown was there's a Chinese cemetery, and in the cemetery in Cooktown and all around that area you'll have little Chinese pockets in the cemeteries, and that's always a bit sad because a lot of those diggers would have liked to go home.
Yeah, far from home. Hey, Marie, before we throw things to the audience, I have some questions about, maybe they're almost philosophical questions about why you write, because it makes me think of your previous book, novella that was shortlisted for the Stella Prize, The Fish Girl. It also, in its own way, subverted a narrative in a retelling of the perspective of a character that's normally on the margins or normally silenced. And that's a similar project to what you're doing in this very different story. And I'm wondering, is there a kind of political motivation in what you're doing with your writing as well that you want to interrogate and sort through?
I think so. I mean, I wouldn't want to be too kind of preacherish about it. Yeah, but certainly I think, lately I've been reading about this thing called something memory, imagined memory, but it's about how we like to see ourselves, say in Holland or here, we like to see ourselves in a certain way by not looking at what we can find in history about how actually we came to be here in Australia, say, or how Holland treated Indonesia, because that's not how we see ourselves in this sort of liberal, new way. And yeah, certainly, like you said, I do like to try to, and The Fish Girl, that was a bit different in that I was just really annoyed by that original story. So and also I could relate to the girl, I felt I could relate to the girl. So I just really wanted to tell her side of the story. I was thinking the other day about, and I didn't set out to do this isn't why, but lately I've been asked a lot about what writers have influenced me or whatever, inspired me. And I was saying something like, writers like Amy Tan or that Maxine Hong Kingston came at a time in my life when it was welcome because you could see that sort of this Asian story had a place or could be a bestseller, in a Western society, which was a big thing at the time. And then I was thinking the other day, we were asked to pitch something about Little Women, and I realised I loved Little Women growing up. And I realised that a lot of the fiction that I loved and aspired to be as a person was about white girls, and that there wasn't really anything for me to aspire to. Not that I necessarily noticed it at the time, but maybe there's a place for sort of filling in those little areas too that I've come to think about lately. But mostly I write about what interests me. So it's all, and that sort of the cultural sort of background of things interests me.
I was reading some of the commentary around your work, and especially this latest book of yours, and a few people were pointing out that they really felt, and I think I do as well, that this novel is a feminist work. How do you feel about that that assessment?
Stone Sky. You know what's funny is I thought of it when I wrote it, and even after I finished it, I thought of it as more sort of a cultural kind of book. And my crime fiction I've tried to make quite feminist, and I know Fish Girl was. And a part of me, I remember even thinking, a part of me was like, oh, what a pity I couldn't push, or not push, but sort of explore feminist issues in this book. And then, of course, and then somebody said something and I was like, oh, of course I have, because I did on purpose want to write about, say things like domestic violence or that sort of menace. Yeah, so it's, or, like women's rights to, forms of freedom. But yeah, it was funny that it just kind of snuck in there without me really being conscious of it.
I mean, these characters haven't met second wave feminism yet, but they're in their own ways proto-feminists, I think, proto-feminist characters. Hey, Miranda, before we throw things over to the audience, we had an acknowledgement of country from Karen before. And I'm curious to know where you are at the moment on this continent, which Aboriginal nation you're on. I'm broadcasting from Gadigal country on the Eora Nation. Whereabouts do we find you right now?
Yes, I meant to acknowledge before that I am on the land of the Turrbal and Yagara people, but also that my book is set in the Maytown area, which is the Western Yalanji people, and they were very helpful too with writing my novel.
Yeah,
yes,
terrific. And of course, we're speaking across space and time because we can't do in-person and in-store book events and launches at the moment, but this is kind of nice in its own way because it becomes quite accessible to everyone around the country. But I am curious, how has this pandemic and its parameters affected your work and also the way in which you're talking about this novel of yours?
Oh, that's interesting, Ben, because when it first came out at the beginning of this pandemic, a part of me was, I did wonder if the book would sort of sink into this sort of pandemic, lull. But actually, I think all this Zooming and book clubs and bookshops and you guys and everyone's been so supportive. It's been really, and podcasts, it's been really wonderful. But the I did at the beginning, I was like, oh gosh, I brought out this book that's sort of sympathetic to the Chinese. At this time, while this pandemic started, and then a couple of people said to me, no, that's probably good timing, and actually the more sort of ridiculous racist attacks I hear about here and in America, the more I think maybe that's true, to remember the individuals again,
Yeah, absolutely.
As opposed to the horde.
Yes. Oh, well, as I said before, Mirandi, it's both a timeless book as a historical novel, but very timely for all of these resonances that maybe you couldn't have even anticipated when you were writing it. But as a reader, all of us who've read it are very, very grateful that you've written this magnificent novel. Congratulations. I'm going to throw it back to Tracy and to the audience now. See you later.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you both so much for a thought-provoking, philosophical and wise conversation. I'm going to go straight to the questions because there are so many of them. Cass Moriarty, who is a wonderful writer, has asked, can you tell us about the struggles that confronted you when you were including Indigenous history in this story? What were your concerns and how did you address them?
Well, the first thing was when I, like I said, it was supposed to be, originally it was just going to be a love story between, an Asian man and an Australian woman. But by the time I did my research into North Queensland, you realise actually there was just so much more that has to be explored, especially to do with how the Western Yalanji and the local Indigenous people were treated. And I would say in the end, that was probably one of my main preoccupations, was trying to get that right. So I did confer with the Western Yalanji people and spoke to them about that I could write about how scared the Chinese were of them at the time, and also about the violence against them. But of course but then I had to weigh that against that it's not my story to tell as such, and I certainly wasn't going to appropriate any voices. So all I could show was what maybe my Chinese characters witnessed themselves and their honest reactions. So I didn't want to be prescient. I didn't want them to be like a white savior character, I wanted it to be not truthful, but how maybe their reactions would have been given the fear. And also I wanted to show that just by being in the area in such a huge number, that they were also complicit, that they were as explicit in what happened to the local Indigenous people and the landscape or whatever. I didn't want to sort of whitewash or, you know, like sweep over their complicity in all of it as well. So I put a lot of thought into how it was portrayed. But I know another Queensland Aboriginal writer is writing her own story, you know, about what happened here too. So yeah, so I just put a lot of thought into it. I think that's what needs to be done.
Yeah, there's one scene that is particularly traumatic along that theme, and I think you've got the balance really, really well done. There's another question about that too. Your novel is impeccably researched, and it sounds like it was informed by passion in addressing inequity and marginalisation. How did you marry research and emotion in writing the book?
Well, I think when you read some things, like I was saying before about the how we try to think of ourselves through memory, I think when you actually go back and you read some of the things that happened, and they're even reported in quite a gleeful manner, you know, like what they might have done to the Chinese, you know, like grabbing them all by their pigtails and yanking them along, or the massacres, or like what that digger actually said, you know, what he's reported to have said, that I've given Clem, you know, that, you know, Clem says when they witness what they witness. Well, they're, you know, I mean, just reading those accounts fills you with emotion. So, I mean, then I just would go to the page with those emotions from, I guess, the Chinese point of view.
Yeah. Someone's asked, one of my favourite characters is Shan and what she represents. And I found this really interesting as well. You know, a touch of magic realism. How did you balance that while keeping it realistic?
I guess if you're trying to write something like that, and I think it's the same with, say with the Ocean Queen in Fish Girl, the only thing you can do is write it like it is, that it is, you know, like I'm not trying to write it in a mythical way or a ghostly way. It is what it is. And that's how I would, you know, from craft wise, that's how I would tackle it. I write it as, you know, Laia thinks she's real. I don't know if she's real or not. I don't know what people's opinions are, but he thinks she is, you know, so that's how I write it. Yeah.
Yeah, she provides a great counterpoint to him in those conversations to get inside his head. There was a question that came earlier, even before we started, and I'd like to ask both of you this, Ben and Mirandy. As celebrated artists, does the commercial necessity of maintaining a media presence limit your ability to create new projects, or do the leads just come to you now? Ben, do you want to answer that, and then Mirandy?
It's interesting because I guess I work in the media and I work in the arts, you know, like I straddle the two, and in some ways I don't see them as completely separate things. You know, as much as I have works of creativity, like my play, I'm also hosting radio and I host television sometimes and do things like this, for instance. And I kind of embrace all of those things. So I'm probably one of the lucky people in that, you know, when you work in the arts, you have to kind of multitask out of necessity anyway. But I'm one of those people who quite happily does that. I don't necessarily see one as supporting or leveraging the other. I just happen to have a really like disgustingly promiscuous career. And when it comes to putting stuff out there, say on social media or maintaining a media presence, I actually do it because I'm fortunate enough that I actually like that. You know, I work alone in this room. I actually left this room, this apartment, for the first time in 48 hours the other day. So, you know, social media, Twitter, that sort of stuff is actually really important for my mental health, as much as it might corrode my mental health at the same time.
Yeah, great point. What about you, Mirandy?
Well, I'm not at Ben's level. Mine's just a bit of fun, I think. I like connecting. I like the connection with other writers, but that would be about it. Yeah, I don't know about with my work. I think my work's kind of separate. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a question here, and this is something that jumped out to me reading the book, the descriptions of the Chinese diggers at the time, and it's quite confronting from a modern lens. And this questioner writes, in writing historical fiction, how do you find the process of writing racism in a way that's both authentic to the time, but critical from a modern perspective?
The racism.
Mm.
Well, like I said before, it's a bit easy because they did call them chinks and things. So as soon as you put down the word chink, I mean, to us now it's already like, you know. And the scene, you know, the scene in the shop where they're accosted, that actually I on purpose a few years ago you can find it on YouTube. I won't say who it was, but there's a fellow being harangued in a pub for not being white, and I actually took it not word for word, but I got the tone and the escalation from that scene that you can get on YouTube from, I think it was 2017 it happened, and it easily transferred to 1877, which is not great. But I did that on purpose.
Yeah, it's incredibly telling, isn't it? Look, unfortunately, we've run out of time for questions, but thank you both so much. You've got such a beautiful rapport in conversation. Someone's just written here, is Miranda actually sitting at Ben's house?
Yes, we're just in neighbouring bedrooms, actually.
That's
I'm going to have
right.
a cup of tea with her right after this.
I've been 48 hours in the room next to his.
It's all theatre. It's all lies.
That's right, smoke and mirrors. Look, thank you both so much. And I would agree. I love that question you asked, Ben, about it being a feminist book, because the female characters are so strong. And I was just celebrating all of these strong, different female characters living with violence against women, living with intersectional discrimination. And, you know, it's a really powerful feminist book as well. So thank you both. Miranda, please give a plug about where we can buy your book.
Oh, well, we're at your local bookshop, online, whatever suits you. Avid reader here in Brisbane is very good to me, and we have Riverbend in Brisbane, and I think Readings down there has been very good to me. So just wherever you get your good local books.
Excellent plug. Ben, what would you like to plug at the moment amongst your myriad jobs?
I don't know. I don't have too much to plug. I would plug my play, but you know, coronavirus has taken away that opportunity. No, look, I'm continuing to co-host Stop Everything on ABC Radio National. You can find it on ABC Listen and podcasts as well, and I do that with Beverly Wang every Friday. So that's always fun. But otherwise, I'd just echo Miranda's point. You know, support your local independent bookshop. They've been really, really tireless in a really challenging time. A lot of them are delivering by hand and bike at the moment. I mean, what's not to love?
Wow, that's extraordinary. Ben and Miranda, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Tracy. Thanks, Miranda.
Thank you.
Race out and buy this book now. This is the cover. Abby Alexander, our wonderful social media manager, has just put a link in the chat box where you can buy it, and we'll send you all an email tomorrow. But before we leave you, we're back to our wonderful raconteur, Richard Fitzgerald, for the answers to the quiz.
Well, Tracy, here we go. We've had some interesting responses to the quiz. Everybody, thank you so much for answering the questions. I did get into trouble from Jim, though, I must say, because my bookshelf was not colour-coded, like yours and Ben's. So I'll try and make sure I do something about that for next week. But here are the answers to tonight's quiz. So what was the title of the bestseller? Of course, it's Celeste Barber's Challenge Accepted. Question 2, Donald Trump actually wrote The Art of the Deal, not the meal or the feel. Question 3, this will be interesting. What is the highest rated book on Goodreads? Everybody got answers on this one. It is, in fact, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. So the last one in the Harry Potter series. Question 4, the Menage a Trois. Most people seem to get this one right. Of course, they are all characters in Puberty Blues. Question 5, the New York Times review relates to Where the Crawdads Sing, which a fantastic novel that spent over 2 years in the top levels of the New York Times bestseller list. Matthew Riley, can you believe this, was actually only 19 when he self-published his first novel. And question 7, Party Animals. It could have related to any of the titles, but it is actually the story of the Labor Party's fiasco, if you want to call it that, at the last election. So there we go.
Richard, thank you so much. Love the quiz. And I think it's inevitable that at some stage Donald Trump will write the book, The Art of the Feel. I look forward to that one. Thank you so much to all of our wonderful speakers tonight. Benjamin Law, Richard Fitzgerald, Miranda Rewo and Candy Bowers. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to Abby Alexander for doing our brilliant social media support. Thank you, Simon Vaughan, for looking after our tech. We got it all together. Woo! Next week, you'll be able to listen to advertising guru, voracious reader, I have to say, broadcaster Dee Madigan, and she's in conversation with Twee On. Now, she's the books editor of The Big Issue. She's written her first collection of poetry called Turbulent. She calls it Theatre on the Page, and she wants to talk to you about the connection between Scrabble and sex. That's going to be absolutely ripping. If you'd like to join us, please register for the webinar. Otherwise, you can live stream on Facebook. Please stay safe, keep reading, and good night. Bye-bye.